Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart. Today, my guest is Dan Weisberg, the CEO of the New Teacher Project, and a product of the New York City Public Schools. Also has a long resume that we can do, but I don't like to eulogize people at the beginning of shows of all that they've done. Take it for granted that if Dan is here, it's because he has something to teach us where he has expertise in a field, and we don't need to go through the entire resume. But you can find Dan on Twitter. His handle on Twitter is Dan Weisberg, TNTP, and lots of good stuff in his feed. Today, we wanted to talk a little bit about all the buzzwords are killing me, Dan. So you're going to help me in this show I'm going to speak in plain English just up front. We've had a really rough time during this global pandemic over the last couple of years, year and a half, or however many months it is now. Teaching, learning, parenting have all been in upheaval. For some families, I'm sure they did okay, or they did fine if they had resources or whatnot. But for the majority of families, there was an upset to schooling, what we were normally doing before the pandemic. And now we might have signs of life that we're coming back, but we don't know what we're coming back to. We don't know what the challenges are going to be necessarily. There's some mysteries involved in the next 18 months, like what happens now. And how do we arrive at the year 2023, for instance, with kids that are ahead, not behind, but as if we didn't really go through a pandemic? What can we do so that it doesn't just feel like a lost year? Dan, thank you for joining. I appreciate you, man.
Hey, thank you for having me. You know, any day I get to talk to Chris Stewart is a good day. Seriously, I know I'm going to be challenged. I know it's going to be interesting. So I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I want some of your expertise. Your organization, TNTP, has put out a report recently that I think it's time to talk about it. So first of all, the report is called Accelerate, Don't Remediate. It's on the TNTP website for people that want to find it. If you want to find it, just go to tntp.org with the / and then accelerate. And the accelerate, Dan, is one of those buzzwords I'm going to need help with, right? So let's not call it lost. What learning loss?
Learning loss.
Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So anyways, we'll get there eventually, but let's just start with the thesis of the new report, the findings of the new report in big strokes and like headlines. What's the headline of the Accelerate, Don't Remediate stuff that you guys have put out?
Yeah. So let me, there's really just three, but let me start, Chris, with what you're talking about. What do we mean when we say accelerate? What do we mean when we say remediate? Pretty simply, remediation, which is the traditional way we have tried to catch kids up who are behind, means just giving them what they have missed or giving them what they haven't yet had success with. Now, in the context of COVID-19, what that means is, many students have lost a lot of time. They haven't been in school. They've been on remote. Some of them haven't even been on remote. So remediation would look like, gosh, here's a student sitting in 4th grade who missed a third of last year. Let me just repeat what she missed from 3rd grade and spend month or 2 months or 3 months just doing review of what she missed from the year before. That makes a lot of sense at a high level. The problem is it just doesn't work very well to catch kids up, because if you're spending most of 4th grade or a big chunk of 4th grade on 3rd grade material, then how are you supposed to cover 4th grade? And so acceleration, that's remediation, is just doing what was missed or the student isn't successful with. Acceleration is no, start 4th grade with 4th grade math problems. And when you see where students need help, bring in just kind of in the moment, in time, the lessons from 3rd grade that will allow that student to be successful with 4th grade. And so what this paper is about, with our friends at Zearn, and just a word about Zearn, this is a nonprofit elementary math curriculum company that provides really high quality math content online. And they provide it to millions of students across the country. Some of you listening may have used Zearn while your kids were at home, not able to go to school in the last year. It's a terrific, terrific platform. But it also, Chris, produces incredible data from millions of kids. And so what they were able to see is what happens with students who undergo remediation, just lots and lots of review from the prior grade, and what happens with students who undergo acceleration, meaning they really start with the current grade and get help where they need it, but not whole scale review.
So the acceleration part is really, rather than assuming everybody is far behind and starting with remediation, start where you were going to start anyways, where you should be, and then scaffold to fill in holes, or, you know, like and maybe kids aren't as behind. I like this because having 3 different kids in my house, one might be further behind and one might even actually have done okay in the last year. Right? Like, you know, you never know what you're working with. And as a parent, man, until you have some help and some assistance with kind of figuring out, we just survived this year. We just survived this year. And you mentioned Zearn. So isn't it like, I think it's like 1 in 4 students are in Zearn.
Yeah.
So it's a big data set that
Yes.
they probably had to work with. Okay. So this isn't just some fly by night stuff, Dan. You guys are really like, you understand, you have a big data set and you know what kids need, probably more than we do. And I love it because I was calling out throughout the year. We were on all these different platforms, Alex and Schoology, and, you know, just keep going down the list. We had a list of them, and it didn't feel like there was any embedded way for them to know, like, we weren't testing all year, so they didn't really know whether or not it was working out. So it was a mystery to us. So next year will be very interesting. I hope we do accelerate and not remediate in the next year. What do you think? What did you want to happen with the report, though? So there's this focus on, you know, not remediating and getting kids ahead and getting ready for next year. But what does that really mean? What are you pushing schools to do?
Yeah, so I mean, let me tell you what we found. Let me answer your question that I should have answered a minute ago about the headlines. One, and because these findings are, I think, big. These are earth-shattering findings. So one, the students who experienced acceleration, right, who started with, in my hypothetical, started at 4th grade and just got help where they needed it, struggled less with grade level material and learned more than students who started at the same level but just did all that review. And so in general, in this big data set, the acceleration students completed successfully 27% more grade level assignments than the students doing remediation. And by the way, Chris, you might think, well, of course they did, because the whole thing about acceleration is keeping a grade level. Except the reason we do remediation is the assumption that kids won't succeed if you just throw them into grade level work. But if you're smart about it, the answer is they'll do way better with grade level if you actually start them at grade level and give them smart help when they need it. Here's the second thing. And Chris, this one is, I don't want this to get lost. A lot of nerds like me and my colleagues will really nerd out on that first finding. Oh, acceleration, grade level, you know, smart help. The second one I think is critically important, and that is students of color and students from low-income backgrounds were more likely than their white, wealthier peers to experience remediation. So this whole-scale review from the prior year. But here's the kicker. Even when they had already demonstrated success on grade level content.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Wow.
So here you are. Let's say you're an African-American 4th grader. You are kicking butt. You're doing really well on 4th grade math problems. You are still going to get way more review, even though you're demonstrating that you don't need it, than your white peer in the school down the street.
Okay, so why is that? Why is that?
I mean,
yeah, I know. Every time I ask the question, why? Right? Yeah, why?
Officially, can't say from this data, but I mean, look, Chris, this squares with what we saw on the opportunity myth. Same thing. kids of color and low-income kids who had high test scores the year before still were 30% more likely, 30% less likely to get grade level assignments, even though they had high test scores, than their white, wealthier peers. I mean, this is just systemic bias. I mean, most likely, in my opinion, this is a reflection of the kind of often unseen systemic bias that kids of color, low-income kids see every day. And the thing I want to emphasize here is we know this because the Zearn platform gives us into a window into the choices that are being made. But Chris, you served on a school board, you've watched districts for a long time. Typically, we're blind to these choices that are being made that have really profound consequences. So it may be in your particular district, in your kid's school, that choices are being made about whether your kid gets an opportunity to excel with grade level work, and you won't know about it. And the principal won't necessarily know about it. And the teacher, by the way, this may be totally unconscious, but the impact is huge.
I mean, your guys' previous report, which you just mentioned, Opportunity Myth, looked at tens of thousands, or at least 10,000. I can't remember how many it was, assignments across the country. Yes. What you're finding in that particular report was that students of color are way more likely to not be given grade level work, even when they're at grade level, and they should be getting grade level work. And I shouldn't even say even when, just period. Right. They're not being given grade, and in fact, it's a couple grade levels down in a lot of cases. That's a system. That's systemic. And now here you are, Dan, returning here with another report that now says, in the pandemic sweepstakes, we might even need to be more vigilant once again about closing the belief gap. Like the belief of what our kids are capable of versus what they're actually capable of. There's a gap between those two things. What would I do with this information in a state on different levels, as a state legislator, as a district leader, a superintendent, as a principal, a teacher, and a parent? These are the levels I always think about when I see these reports. Like, who should I push to do what here?
Yeah, that's the great question. And this is in the context, of course, of once in a generation infusion of federal funds. I mean, maybe it won't be once in a generation, but I think we should all assume that. I think at every level, you want to advocate, whether you are a parent, whether you're a principal, whether you're a teacher, paraprofessional, state legislator. We can't be blind to these choices anymore. And it should, this report, Chris, is about elementary math. It's, I think, a pretty good assumption that we're seeing the same dynamic in English language arts, in social studies, in high school biology, et cetera, where kids of color, low-income kids, by the way, multilingual learners, kids with special needs are systematically getting excluded from opportunity, but we can't do anything about it if we're blind to it. So now's the time to use some of this money, not just for immediate urgent needs, which I get are important, but to create the system so we know this. Parents should know. In this school that I'm considering sending my child to, I know that kids of color, low-income kids, are getting the same high opportunity to excel at grade level and above grade level as their peers. And in this school, they are not. But
is this something that, is there any measurement of something you can track, or something that districts track, so that you would be able to, if I was listening to this right now and I wanted to run off and find out where my state was on this, or my district, what measurements would I be looking for?
That I'm telling you that they don't exist. What you'll see is, this is the pernicious thing. You'll see the outcomes from this, but the outcomes really are pre-ordered. Outcomes meaning graduation rate is lower for African-American boys, let's say. The proficiency rate is lower for Latinx kids in middle school. You'll be able to see those outcomes. What you won't see is that those outcomes were preordained because those kids who were doing worse weren't given the opportunity. By the way, we saw, this is the other thing, will be no surprise probably to anybody listening in here. We saw this in the opportunity myth. We see this in accelerate, don't remediate, particularly for schools that are majority kids of color. When they do get acceleration, they really zoom ahead. So they are doing almost 50% more, successfully doing 50% more grade level math than kids who are undergoing remediation. There's a huge gap. So you'll see the outcome, and then you'll have a whole bunch of people, including folks from the peanut gallery, who we were talking about before we went on the air, who will make assumptions about why that is. And let's be real, the assumptions will be about the innate ability of kids who get marginalized. It has nothing, of course, to do with ability. It has to do with the opportunity that we adults are providing or not providing.
Yeah, this is what drives me so crazy about education people, educationists, and education professionals, the education establishment, is that they have 99 problems and the child isn't the one, right? Like these school systems and districts or whatnot, if they can get all these things we always talk about figured out, then we have the luxury of talking about what parents aren't doing or what kids can't do, or what their backgrounds or their neighborhoods, all that stuff. But we have so much to correct before we get to that point, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's starting with grade level work when kids qualify for it, gifted and talented access when Black kids qualify for it, great teachers who haven't been passed around and been booted out of the white wealthier schools and dropped into schools where nobody cares about the kids. I mean, there's so many systemic factors here, but the ones that you guys bring up, these ones that are more around the nuts and bolts of like methodology, pedagogy, curricular stuff or whatnot, we rarely even get to these things, right? And I don't know why, but we don't get to it.
We don't, and it's critical. It's really important. And we as parents, I mean, my kids came up through the New York City public schools. At least theoretically, I know more. I'm a pretty educated consumer. I still really had no idea, no real idea whether my kids were getting challenged in the classroom, whether my kids could do more than they were being asked to do. And that belief gap, Chris, that you mentioned a few minutes ago, that's the fuel, man. That is the fuel of the inequities that we see. And so if we only focus on the technical stuff, like, look, curriculum adoption, really important, pedagogy, really important. If we don't attend to that belief gap, then we're going to see really limited results for the kids who, we are both most passionate about. And so here's I do want to strike a tone of hope here, where we work with teachers. Yeah,
bring us some hope. Yeah,
here's the hope. And look, I am. You talk to my folks. I am not necessarily a glass half full guy, but we have the opportunity to work with teachers directly, and just good, solid teachers, not the teacher of the year in the state, but good, solid teachers who care about their kids. And we don't preach at them about the belief gap, but what we do is give them opportunities to teach really good, rich, relevant, rigorous lessons to kids who maybe in the back of their head, maybe in the front of their head, they're not really sure that the kid can be successful with a really rigorous lesson. Almost 100% of the time, they are pleasantly surprised with how well the students do, who they may consider to be struggling learners, when they are really challenged, when they're given really rigorous, rich, relevant instruction. And why is that important? I mean, this is not about surprising the teachers. Those teachers will then go back and take more chances and change their practice because they have actually experienced that, gosh, when I give fourth grade math problems to fourth graders who I know, have had their learning disrupted in third grade or haven't done that well in third grade, I'm not going to do them harm. If I'm smart about how I do it, and I'm strategic and I have help, I'm actually going to see them zoom ahead. And then the other piece that happens, of course, we've done this in summer school in New Orleans for a number of years. The kids know. Like, we think the kids don't know what's going on. The kids know exactly what's going on. So if you're giving a fourth grade or second grade worksheets and putting him or her in the corner, they understand what's going on there. And if you were saying to those kids, I believe in you, I know you missed some things in third grade, but I believe in you. I think you can do this fourth grade math problem, and I'm going to help you to do it. The kids know what's going on there too. And so guess what? The kids are more engaged, and the kids are more interested in math or whatever the subject is. So we can change this. We can attack this belief gap, but we've got to want to do it.
Yeah, I think that's last point there is really important, in that if you tell a kid, like, I believe you can do this, and you already have a trusting relationship with them, then it makes it easier for them to say, okay, well, if you see, I'm not seeing it maybe as a kid, but if you see it, I can believe you and go with it. Wanted to ask you just about a couple of the charts here, because
Yes.
I like charts. I'm an American. I like pictures. I don't read these studies for the words. I read them for the pictures. So this one, the effectiveness of learning acceleration versus remediation, and I'm seeing 2 points here that are the obvious points here that are really important. What's happening in this gap between these 2 points? This point is saying what classes with learning acceleration are here, and the remediated classes here. And I'm assuming that the gap between these two is the effectiveness.
So the gap is how much they struggle, literally.
How much they struggle.
This is the beauty. How much they struggle with grade level math work. And so and our friends at Zearn, this is courtesy of our friends at Zearn. So this is 3 years of data. These are the kids, some of whom are going to experience acceleration, some of whom are going to experience remediation. Well, they're struggling about the same 2 years ago, 18, 19. And then last year, not surprisingly, everybody struggles a bit more. You see that line go up. But still, the acceleration remediation classes, the kids are struggling about the same. They're all struggling a little bit more because it's a pandemic year. It's tough. Then we see the divergence. And why is the divergence happening? Because the kids in red are getting remediation. They're getting review after review after review after review. And guess what? They're struggling a lot more than the kids who are getting acceleration, who are actually getting grade level material, getting help where they need it from prior grades. The kids in green, the kids who are getting acceleration, their struggle is back down almost to pre-pandemic levels. They're doing about as well with grade level work as they did before the pandemic. Whereas the kids who are getting remediation, review after review, they're struggling way more than they did before the pandemic. So that's what we're showing here.
To right here is saying that, they're doing 27% better. Is that right? Like
27% better when you look at completing grade level problems. And again, it may be intuitive, maybe not, because here's what look, there's folks out there who say, this is wrong. You really need to remediate. You really need to fill all those gaps before you give them grade level work. And what they'll say is, if you give these kids who missed stuff in third grade, if you give them fourth grade problems, it'll be counterproductive. It's too hard for them. They'll struggle. They'll fall backwards. No. It's not too hard for them. They didn't. They struggled less, and they completed more grade level assignments. Whereas the remediation folks, it left the kids more confused and with more struggle. So that's what we're saying there.
So give me some help with figure 4 here. What's going on here?
So this is the optimistic slide. So what you see on the left, we've basically broken it down. This is, remember I said the kids who are getting acceleration completing 27% more. So that's that top line. All students who are getting acceleration are completing 27% more. In schools with large majorities of students of color, this is what I mentioned earlier, they're completing 49% more grade level assignments than in the remediation context. So in schools with majority of kids of color, they're doing much, much better when they're getting acceleration. Low income schools with mostly low income kids, 28%, they're also doing quite a bit better with acceleration. But the thing that really pops is majority students of color schools doing so much better with acceleration. And I don't know if I can literally say this, so take this with an asterisk from this data, but these are the kids who are least likely to get acceleration. The kids who are going to zoom ahead the most are probably least likely to get it. And that's the belief gap. That's the problem. And then on the right of the screen, we just see the difference in struggle level. So for kids, again, going across on that middle line for schools that are mostly kids of color, their kids are struggling with grade level work 10 times more if they're getting remediation than if they're getting acceleration. So, I mean, if we're thinking about the student experience, like, you know, look, I'm old, but I can remember sitting back in an elementary classroom and struggling with work and feeling like I'm not getting anywhere, like I'm not getting close to it. I'm struggling again and again and again with the same thing. That's not a good place where we want our kids to be. We want them to struggle. We want them to overcome. Yeah. We want them to feel like they're going to get there. And so that red line is a lot of kids who probably don't feel like they're going to get there. That's not where we want our kids to be.
And if we're assuming like trends, you know, this is like a snapshot of where we would be when we get back to business, or like right now. Right. But the trend of this would be like 3 years from now and 5 years from now and 10 years from now. This would keep bearing bad fruit at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, I mean, look, this is not just about pandemic. And one of the things I would say, Chris, is like, hey, it's good that we have a focus now on how do we catch kids up. That's really good. A lot of us have been talking about how, you know, that being a problem for decades. We are terrible at this country. I mean, we should just call it out. Like, when kids come in behind and you look at their trajectory over time, the typical kid who comes in behind, whether it's kindergarten, first grade, third grade, what have you, they don't. The typical kid does not make up ground. The gaps just continue, and in some cases get larger. So one, we need to call it, like, we don't do a good job of this. So doing the same thing we typically do should be the last thing we consider. But good news, we have some promising alternatives to the way we've done things in the past. And particularly, again, for those kids who tend to get the short shrift in our schools, kids of color, low-income kids, kids who are learning English, kids with special needs, like, it is critically important that we not do the things that the way we've done in the past, because those kids end up always losing out.
Is there anything special about the fact that this was done mostly on math, but, you know, is math somehow a different subject from reading in a way where we would expect maybe we could have some wildly different outcomes if we did this on another subject?
It's going to look different. And by the way, it's going to look different. And, you know, we haven't taken this on high school chemistry. I don't know exactly what it would look like there. I would say the belief gap, Chris, is going to be there across the board, every graded subject. And it's going to have some negative impacts on kids who are traditionally underserved in any grade, any subject. But yeah, it's going to look different in reading. There are some foundational reading. Let me describe it like this. There's some foundational reading skills that kids need to have. And so if a kid literally can't decode the words, kid, you know, can't sound it out, doesn't understand what doesn't have what literacy folks would call and reading folks would call phonemic awareness, you've got to go back and make sure they've got those building blocks. That's really important. But what does that mean? Let's say you've got a fourth grader who really has trouble decoding, reading the words, literally reading the words on the page. You don't want to ignore that. You want to make sure there's extended time for that student to gain those skills. But if you're reading, if the class is reading a fourth grade book, you wouldn't want to exclude that student from the discussion. You might want to give that student some extra help to be able to really engage in the discussion. Like maybe during extra time, you would go through and make sure that the student understood the plot. Maybe you would read independently to that student. Maybe you'd read to the whole class, But the critical thing is, even though that student lacks some foundational literacy skills, he or she has the ability to do the critical thinking. That's what we miss. So make sure that student, while getting extra help with foundational reading skills, is in that discussion of the fourth grade book. That's really, really important, because that's where she's going to develop her critical thinking, and it's going to help probably with her foundational skills as well. She's going to be really energized about being with the full class. Make sure that kid has a seat at the table.
Yeah, I wonder how much teachers can do. Christina Laster in our notes here says teachers are actually taking how many teachers are actually taking these lessons, ideas, and methodologies back into the classroom after professional development. Tracine says we must close the belief gap. Yes, I agree with you, Tracine. Michelle Gould says teachers must collaborate to understand their standards together. And I think that is, some of these things are eternal. Like we would have said this before COVID, and we'll say it now probably even more. If teacher teams aren't working together to understand the data of the same kids in their schools, and to see where everybody is at, whatnot, it's going to be hard as a team to help kids get ahead. Joy Hunt says we must teach grade level content and fill in the gaps where the need arises, which is kind of your point, Dan. I mean, this is what you're saying. Yeah, I think actually there's a lot here about individual teachers, and I wonder how much a teacher can actually do. I mean, listen, let me just start with this, Dan. You're a nonprofit organization, and you worked with Zearn to do this report, and you bring out this report, and it's got these pretty startling findings to someone like me, who's a tax-paying, voting civilian parent. And I'm wondering why my tax-paying civilian parent status didn't have my government, my school district, be this curious about acceleration versus remediation and already have a plan in place for all this. I don't know if you have an answer for that, but you've worked on both sides of this. You've been in nonprofit, you've been in government. I mean, you've seen in New York how something like this would go down. Like, for instance, in your city, New York, why wouldn't the mayor, the chancellor, and everybody else have already kind of looked at something like this and done it themselves?
One thing is we're going to have a new mayor in the last half of the year, and I'm hoping the new mayor in New York City is going to take on whoever that is. I don't know who it's going to be, but whoever it is takes this on. But I'll give you one technical reason. New York City is unfortunately an apt example of this. This should not fall all on individual teachers. That's a disaster. So if we are asking our individual teachers to essentially assemble their own curriculum and come up with the lessons themselves, if we are not giving teachers help on what are those concepts from the prior grade that I need, if I am doing a division problem, what are in fourth grade, what are the concepts from third grade that I need to bring forward? We should not be asking individual teachers to figure all that out. The first thing, Chris, which we don't have in New York City, is have a really good, rich, relevant curriculum in every grade and subject that actually is tied to the state learning standards, what it is we expect kids to learn in every subject in every grade. And again, like as you're saying, like as a civilian tax-paying parent, you probably assume that's happening. That whatever it is, if it's sixth grade social studies, if it's fifth grade ELA, that the teacher has a curriculum that is tied to the state learning standards. But in many, many cases, they do not. They have to kind of make it up themselves, or they've got a curriculum, but it's not very good. It's not tied to the learning standards. It's not relevant to most of the kids you're teaching, and so that's one. You gotta focus on curriculum. Then you got to focus on acceleration, how to help really give what Zearn did. Here's like the gold standard. These guys deserve so much credit. In their elementary math platform, you didn't have to guess what are those standards and units from the prior grade that I need to bring forward. They created a full roadmap for you. And so all you had to basically do was follow that. Now, we don't have that in most grades and subjects, but that should be what we're striving towards. Make it easy for teachers to do this because it's too much to ask them to figure it all out themselves.
Well, I'm going to say a bad thing here, Dan. I always have to say like a bad thing once or twice a day.
We count on it.
Yeah. So in New York, for instance, and this is, being a non-New Yorker, and so much of the education gets New Yorkicized when we talk nationally. We act like all of America is in New York, and they're not. And as a matter of fact, don't want to be when it comes to education necessarily. But Success Academy, for instance, is one of those places. First of all, I dropped in for a day and actually got to sit in classes, what they were doing online or remote learning. And man, just like you would expect for them, they had actually regimented practice to a way to where it looked the same from classroom to classroom in terms of how alert kids were, how astute they were expecting them to be, how it was rigorous. It was still moving forward. It wasn't assuming, oh, you poor dear, let's, lighten the load. But that's not the point of what I'm saying. I guess the point of what I'm saying is they put their curriculum online for everybody to use.
Right.
They share it. It's not a secret. So in terms of like, this is the sequence of how we do things. This is this is how we've thought it out. I don't know whether I love or hate, necessarily this school or that school. This isn't the point. The point just really is to see that level of cognition around what they do, and to know that they're like little engineers over there. They're figuring it out, and then they put it out and they share it with the public. It leaves me to say the same thing. I just asked you the same question. I feel like I'm asking it again. I don't understand why districts and district leaders and state leaders and mayors and others aren't the least bit kind of engineering about this type of problem. It almost feels like they're pulling tarot cards and saying, hey, maybe you'll learn, maybe you won't,
Yeah, I mean, well, that's probably above my pay grade. Why isn't it that we all kind of do this?
It is not. Don't say that, Dan. It is not. Don't try and dodge the question.
But
if there is a question in there,
I'm an old district guy, as you know, and one of the things I will say in defense of folks in districts is you're hearing about 100 different factors which actually are important. So you're hearing about, we need to deal with some kids come in hungry. There's food insecurity issues. That's actually important to their learning. That is important. Social emotional issues, mental health issues. Like you're hearing from a lot of experts. Those things you got to deal with those things, and it is true. There are transportation issues. There are a myriad of issues. There's you are hearing rightly so that this is probably a topic for another show, but culture responsive teaching, really important. How am I going to train my teachers to actually be able to connect so kids are engaged? Because if kids are not engaged, they're not going to learn. That's really important. So you're hearing all the curriculum is really important. High school redesign is really important. Our high schools and workforce development. What are we doing to connect our high school kids to not just higher ed, but to careers? And so you end up oftentimes, I think, getting swallowed up. The really good leaders, I will say, create focus. They just do. Terry Greer, the former superintendent friend of mine from Houston ISD, talks about this a lot. Like, if you try to do everything, you're going to accomplish nothing. And so what we try to do at TNTP is simplify it. Like, look, yes, all these things are really important, but here are the foundational pieces. And Chris, you do this. I'm going to give you some props. Whatever the context of the conversation is, and you are in some wide-ranging conversation, you're always bringing it back to teaching and learning. Like, if we can't get teaching and learning right, then the rest of it might not even be relevant. And so as a leader, I hope this happens in New York City. What are those three things that we're going to guarantee to students and parents about their experiences? And, what are the 3 or 4 strategies that we're going to use? It can't be 8. It can't be 20. It's got to be a few things that if we get right, it's going to allow us to build on top of it. And it all, to me, look, what's the core of what we expect schools to do? We expect schools to be safe, nurturing places that help our kids to learn what they need to learn in order to be successful and reach their goals. Yeah, and so if we can't do the learning piece, I'm not sure what why we'd be talking about anything else.
I'm not as charitable as you are in this situation, and you've worked with districts for a long time, directly with districts. In fact, you were in my district when I was a school board member years ago, like a decade ago. I was on the school board, and you came and saw what was in our district. That was over a decade ago, Dan, that you were there. And here we are over a decade later. In the comments here, Dave Weingartner is someone, he's a parent here in Minneapolis who watches the local school district very closely. And he watches it with kind of a forensic eye on things like our reading program and our materials that we have, our curriculum. And I can't find the quote here, but if I can find it, I'll come back to it. But he basically just dropped in the truth bomb about Minneapolis. Minneapolis is not a poor district. It's not a poor city. It's not a city that lacks lots of resources. And here it is. This is what he says. In Minneapolis, 66% of Black home language English students are not proficient in math and not making a year's worth of growth. Now, we're saying that about a school district that adopted a math program more than a decade ago, kind of just throwing a dart at a board between two very expensive ones. When the company, the corporation brought us the choices, they didn't have any research or data on how they had performed in other similar districts. We asked them for it, and they said, no, it takes about 10 years to know whether it's working or not. And I thought, wow, as a layperson coming onto a school board, I thought, this is how y'all make decisions? It takes about 10 years to figure out whether or not it's working. You're going to make this major investment in how you teach math. And here's your report. Your report today from a math provider says the first thing, ensure students have access to high quality instructional materials. That's one of the first recommendations in your report. So of course, my mind is going to blow up in that. Like 12 years ago, my city actually spent a big ass amount of money on a big corporate program for math. They weren't the least bit curious. This is what the decision came down to. One math program had more word problems in it and the other one didn't. And there was a fight amongst teachers in the wealthier schools and the poorer schools. Well, we like this one. And well, no, we like this one. So you know what these dummies did? And I'm sorry to talk like this, but one group of teachers liked one, another group of teachers liked another. So they chose a third one, which neither of the teachers liked, but that was a mix between the two, a hodgepodge. And now here we are, like 12 years later, you and I are having a conversation, and David Weingartner, a long-term parent in the district who watches the district very closely, dropped a truth bomb in our discussion here, saying that 66% of Black students in the Minneapolis public schools, which aren't poor, by the way. So when I tell you that, you helped us years ago with figuring out how we place teachers and, how teachers make it into the classroom and what schools. We had a big ass problem with that. Well, we solved it. You kind of came in and helped us solve it or whatnot. But since then, our curriculum and instruction department has been downsized multiple times, and our high schools have wildly different ceilings for math. So our whitest high school in Minneapolis has a ceiling up to here in math. And our blackest high school has a ceiling down here in math, meaning if you're a very bright kid in this high school, you can't even get the other math classes that you need a level or two up. It's not even available in the building. Right. This is in a Humphrey-esque state. This is in a Humphrey liberal, good old-fashioned Walter Mondale, Paul Wellstone state. In a city where you can't get elected to anything as a Republican, where it's the left of the left. And we are staring down the barrel of, and by the way, I mean, at the same time, Mississippi made huge gains with their kids in reading, for instance, and bested us. And Jackson, Mississippi would love our money. They would love to have all the opportunity that we have. So this is my long kind of like soliloquy on why I'm so animated all the time, in that we blame kids, we blame families, we blame them for their poverty, for their culture, for their background. We have conservatives out here saying that, it's because you don't have a dad at home. You don't have a dad. It's all those single moms that are making this happen. We have liberals saying, you're just so hungry. Right. You're just so hungry that you can't possibly do grade level work. And then here you come along giving us this news of like, well, there might be some other things you guys might want to look into if you're going to be leaders of an educational system. So this is where, when I said I wasn't going to be as charitable, Dan, this is where I'm landing on 100% of our problems is educational leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't think being a superintendent's the best job in the world. I don't think it's a great job, but it often pays $300,000 a year for you to come in and do 3 years worth of damage and then go on somewhere else and make $300,000. And some of these people are my friends. I know some superintendents I think are amazing and are worth their weight. And oftentimes the politics drives them out, drives good people out. But I still am not going to stop saying school boards, elected leaders, mayors, chancellors. I mean, we're pushing the mayor of Minneapolis right now. He's got a stable home, stable schools program that only serves 300 families. And the need is in the thousands. But he's given all kinds of breaks to real estate developers. No, Mr. Mayor, you don't get to wash your hands of these things either. You can't lead a world-class city where the kids aren't learning. It can't all be on the schools, right? So I think leadership is my thing. Help me on this. Like you am I doing my typical thing of going too far with it, or what?
Well, I mean, no. I mean, look, leadership is critical, but something you said is really important, which is that superintendent is not an easy job. It is a really hard job, and the politics drives some good leaders out, and that's true. And so, I know of some district leaders that have incredibly ambitious plans and smart strategies, and they get thwarted not by lack of vision, or often even by lack of ability to manage, but because they don't navigate the political dynamics, and maybe there's no way to navigate them in some cities. And there is no silver bullet answer, but I'm going to say that stat, Chris, that you put up from David Weingartner, like whether you are in red state, blue state, I think the reaction to that can still be stuff that is racist, stuff that is not factual in other ways. Like, well, we see these gaps. It must be because of this. And you talked about this, fill in the blank based on your ideology. It must be this, it must be that. I think what changes the politics and what allows us basically to hold leadership accountable is we got to get a window into what's actually producing these outcomes. And because if we believe, I hope we believe, that the problem isn't the students, to use the kind of math lingo, the variable isn't the student's ability, and it's not the parents, and which you hear over and over again. How do we expect these kids to excel? Why is it that you talk about the ceiling for math in the black school is here and the white school is here? What's behind that is the belief gap, is that, well, these kids in the liberal areas, these kids can't possibly be expected to do well because they're poor or this or that. They're facing systemic racism, which is true. The red areas, it might be, as you say, oh, they've got, absentee fathers or what have you. But it's not that. It's that we don't actually give them a chance. So I think what changes the politics and what empowers leadership is, in these next couple of years, being really disciplined about saying we're not going to be blind anymore. We want to know what you're actually asking our kids to do. These groups of kids and these groups of kids. Because here's what I know in my bones. I could find in Minneapolis, if you gave me enough time and access, I could find a classroom or a school where those same black children who, Dave Weingartner is talking about, not proficient in math, are getting an opportunity to excel, and they're excelling. And so if we get the window into
we're going to have to invite you back in, Dan, because
tens of thousands
I'm looking for that school.
Somewhere there's a teacher, somewhere there's a principal who's saying, nope, I'm not going to put the ceiling here for these kids. The ceiling is here. And those kids are excelling. It's not easy. It's not 100% of the time, but they're excelling. And so if we get a window in, we're going to be able to explode all those myths. Kids can't learn. It's the families. It's the kids. We got to solve poverty first. All this stuff that drives me crazy. we're going to explode those myths if we get a window into what kids are actually experiencing, instead of focusing, as you talk about all the time, Chris, on what the adults are doing, what we think we're providing to kids.
Or what
irrelevant to me, what we think we're providing to kids.
Be more clear too, like, you know, what adults will do once they see what the problem is. This is the problem I see. Like, the reason, the big pushback, and a different discussion, but a big pushback I think I see on the CRT crowd, for instance, right now, is it's not that they actually dislike CRT. They don't like the information that's going to come out when you put a critical lens on the system, because the critical lens that you put on the system is going to have an outcome of making you sacrifice something. You're going to have to change something. And what I learned in education practice over, like, you know, watching the district for years and years and years, what I learned is the real problem isn't that they don't know. The real problem is that when you know, you have to do something different. And whenever you propose to do something different, someone's going to be against it, because it's either more work, or it changes their comfort with the job, or it changes their life in some way, shape, or form. So the real problem that I have always seen is not that we don't know, or we don't have the tools for knowing. In some cases, that might be the problem. The real problem, though, comes when you try and do something different. When you tell the adults, okay, now that we know, like, knowing and not doing is the same as not knowing. Right. So knowing and doing. So it's the doing part that people have a real issue with. And I think it's more seductive as a conservative to say the reason that you're not succeeding is not because of systemic racism. It's not the system. It's not the structures. It's you. It's you. It's your parents. Your dad is not there, and blah, blah, blah. Even though, for the record, I'm going to say it because Father's Day is coming up for the 8th millionth time. What's normal for Black children, the majority of Black children in the United States are living with both parents. Let's just start there. The majority of Black children are living with both parents. Let's just start there. 2 parents. Of those that are not, they still have their 2 parents. The majority of the group that aren't living with both parents still have both parents in their lives. And then there's this group that everybody likes to talk about the most, where there isn't a married father in the house. And when you talk about that group, I got to beat this up because, you know, Father's Day is coming up or whatnot. And this is the biggest talking point. So anyways, you could talk about Black fatherlessness all you want, and it's not going to change the fact that you don't have high quality curriculum, that you don't have high quality materials, that your teachers aren't fully trained how to teach the kids that are in their classrooms. I don't know how, like, getting people to get married actually improves the pedagogy. I don't know how that, like, because what I'm watching right now, when I say they want to say there's no such thing as systemic racism, your last 2 reports, to me, might as well be titled Unearthing Systemic Racism. That might as well have been the title. Yeah, you know, the opportunity myth is a clever title, and it's a great American marketing job. It should have just been called Here's Your Evidence of Systemic Racism. Right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, we got the former vice president out there saying, what was it? The systemic racism is a left-wing myth or something. And it's like, yeah, dude, let me show you some data, because it shows up in all our institutions, and it definitely shows up in education. And I don't know, Chris, when I am talking to skeptics about how powerful the effects are of these sorts of biased choices for kids of color, where I go to, the stat I go to is gifted kids. So it's like, right, and you've talked about this too. So you want to talk about family situations, poverty, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, these are kids who are gifted. These are kids who are doing well, really well on all our measures, and they are still getting referred to gifted programs at half the rate of their white peers. How do you explain that? How do you explain that? That has nothing to do with what's happening at home. These are kids who are succeeding.
I know how to explain it. I have the secret. I know how to explain it. It's called systemic racism. Right? I feel like a voice in the woods on these things, because you know, we're about to see major think tanks put out work discrediting systemic racism as a thing. And there are think tanks that push other educational stuff like school choice and others, but they want to discount systemic racism. When you start putting it all together, and your reports are, this is what I love about your reports, is these things are research based, they're studied, they're not necessarily looking for systemic racism, but they're just telling you these are the mechanics of a system. This is the mechanics. This is how the carburetor works. This is how the Altonoid works, whatever, you know, like this is how the spark plugs work. And sometimes those spark plugs don't work. I can send you a study that says that it's our brightest Black students that lose the most ground between kindergarten and third grade. And what I'm going to need somebody to do is explain to me why it is it that it's our Black students that come the most prepared to kindergarten who lose the most ground in the first, third grade. Because I've been hearing for years, oh, the achievement gap starts before kids get to school. Really? Well, then tell me why so many Head Start kids get to kindergarten ready to learn, knowing numbers and colors and having been read to and all this stuff. And why is it that the Head Start effect wears off by second or third grade once you put them into the system? It seems like there might be something wrong with that system, right? Is it just so weird, Dan, that the teachers that get put into the classrooms where the kids need the most are the least prepared? And that's not me saying that. That's what research tells us. Yes. Well, that's weird. Why would that happen? Why would that be? Why would the system do that? Because it's not random. It's not just happening at one school, two schools or whatnot. That's national. So, wow, you mean to tell me the kids that need the most get the least? And then, oh, by the way, once they are in school and they do qualify for grade level material, they don't get that either?
Right.
Well, was that random? Is that just in a few classrooms, or is that, you know, kind of a national problem? What's a national problem? Oh, well, that feels like a system. And this always happens to the kids of color, to the non-white kids that get the least of everything, don't get the opportunities, don't get the door open to gifted and talented, because that's highly correlated with teacher recommendations, by the way. And then you have a state like Florida, and I don't know where you're going to land on this. I mean, Florida had a 300% increase in the number of Black students that not just took the AP exams, but passed the AP exams. And that only happened because they started offering them to everybody. That, to me, feels like the opposite of systemic racism, right? That almost feels like equity. We're going to give everybody AP. We're going to treat everybody like they're a scholar, and then watch the numbers go up. Anyways, I feel like I'm preaching at the end of our show, Dan, but you, your reports, you know, your reports, I actually think this is the utility of them for me. I'm not going to nerd out necessarily on someone who actually understands regression lines and understands all the stuff that other people do. I'm going to nerd out on the impact this does with making the case. The system is not right. Don't blame our kids. Don't talk about our parents. Don't talk about our communities, our culture, our fathers. Don't talk about us. Stop talking about us until you talked about yourself all the way to the point of resolution. Stop talking about us. We need high quality curriculum, high quality opportunities. We need teachers that can teach. We need classrooms where there's a belief, you know, in favor of us, not a belief gap. You need to do some things as a system, not you, Dan. I'm not blaming you because you're my guy. I actually don't think you're responsible, but you know some people who are responsible, I think, for these things. Anyways, we're wrapping. We're coming to an end. I just gave what I feel like a sermon towards the end, and I didn't mean to do it, but these reports are important, I think, for people to internalize. We get a lot of this information. I feel like it goes right by us. Like you gave the headlines of this report. I feel like those headlines should be in the media more. Like people should be, you know, absorbing this. So anyways, in our final minutes, Dan, tell me what you want to happen with this information.
So thank you for inviting me on, and thank you for lifting up this data. I think it's important data. And you know, my hope, look, it's getting, the idea of learning acceleration is getting traction in the media, and that's good. That's good. Like if we change our practices away from remediation to acceleration, all kids will benefit, and particularly kids of color, low-income kids, kids who tend to get marginalized. But here's what I really hope, Chris, that folks don't lose. I'm just going to say, among white people, it's way more comfortable just to talk about curriculum than to talk about the choices that are being made every day in classrooms that we see in this report, to say some kids are going to get the opportunity to excel with grade level and above grade level, and some kids are just never going to get that opportunity. And as you said, it is not random. It is not random. If your child is a child of color, you have a much better chance, unfortunately, of being one of the kids who doesn't get the opportunity. And we're never going to solve that problem if we don't acknowledge it, if we don't embrace it and say this is wrong and we have to do something about it.
All right, here's what I want to do at the end of the show. For people listening and watching this show, first of all, I want to say this has been an hour with Dan Weisberg, who's been very generous with his time and always teaches wherever he goes. I appreciate this. He's the CEO of the New Teacher Project. We've been talking about a report that they have out now around acceleration rather than remediation. If you want to find the report, and I shouldn't say if you want to, you should want to find this report. And let's do this together as civilian, tax-paying parents who care about how the systems work, not just for our own kids, but for all kids. Here's an action of the day. Go to tntp.org/accelerate. Find the report, copy and paste the link, drop it into an email, find the superintendent of your school district, send it to them with the question, what do you think about the findings in this report? And drop a couple of the findings in just so that they can quickly scan and know what they are and start the conversation with the superintendent. It's a simple action. If you really care about millions of kids doing something every day that helps them learn and advance so that they're going to have a future. You can't solve all the world's problems, but you can do one simple daily action. So today's very simple daily action, tntp.org/accelerate. Cut and paste, drop into an email, address that email to the superintendent, ask them a pointed, powerful question that makes them respond to the question. It can be 1 sentence or 2 sentences long, but make sure it's a powerful question that demands they answer you, that they get back to you. These findings are very shocking to me. I wonder what you are doing in your district to address these type of outcomes so that we can have kids accelerate rather than mediate, for instance. And then let's talk about it in a future date. Let's all do this together. I'm committing to do it. I'm going to do it today. I'm sending it to my superintendent, my school district with that exact same question. And I hope every one of you guys do too. That's how we make information actionable. We don't just talk about it. So anyways, Dan, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Same here. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me on. Thank you for that action of the day. That's really powerful, and really appreciate you for all you do.
Excellent. Well, again, guys, if you want to find Dan, harass him online on Twitter. His Twitter handle is at Dan Weisberg TNTP. Don't harass him.